Hi, I'm David. This is Build to Succeed from Very Good Ventures. Today we speak with Andrew Brogdon, DevRel lead for Flutter and Dart at Google. In this episode, we'll discuss the unique nature of DevRel, Andrew's unique journey, how DevRel is changing in an AI-enabled world, as well as some exciting and inspiring ideas for the future of software and app development. I hope you enjoy it, and now let's go talk with Andrew. Hi, Andrew. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thrilled to have you. I've known you for a while. You're obviously a face of Flutter, which we're big in, and so it's a great pleasure to have you on and be able to talk with you. Maybe to get us started, get us warmed up, I want to know a little bit more about you. And so is there a non-tech hobby or interest that you've picked up over the years that maybe people wouldn't expect from someone in a technical role?
Sure. Previous to my current career, I was actually a poet, which is it's always the first question people ask when they see my resume, because I have 2 degrees in creative writing rather than computer science. And long ago, before I had children and ran out of free time, I used to write poetry. I went to grad school for it. And I don't know how much time we have in the podcast. I can actually give you like the 30-second, 60-second story how I
want to hear it.
Sort of got to it. Yeah, sure. So I originally went to school a long time ago. I was a physics major, switched to computer science, left that and went to work as an engineer. This is back during the .com era, which will tell everybody immediately how old I am. And it didn't seem that dumb to leave school to go to work, and that's what I did. And then it became clear that I needed to go back to school and get a degree. And around that time, I was reading a book on the Java programming language, and they were showing how to print text to the screen. And the text that they used in the example in this just like 400-page Java book was a poem by a beat poet, a guy named Lawrence Ferlinghetti. Some of the folks listening to this may have heard of him. He's sort of the patron saint of San Francisco beat poetry. And I read that and realized I was more interested in it than anything else in the book. And so I went to, a very early version of Google at the time, and I threw the first line in, and I found out what poem it was, who had written it in the book, ordered the book, then ordered a bunch more, and eventually went back to school as a poet. And so then, met my wife, realized we were going to get married. Poetry doesn't pay the bills. Even famous poets like T.S. Eliot was a publishing executive, and all of them seemed to have side hustles back in 100 years ago. And so I went back into software engineering, moved out to California for my wife's job as a professor of English, and ended up working at Google.
That is an amazing story. I love that. And so you have this like interrelationship between your love of poetry and software engineering based on even the origin story of that.
A little bit, yeah.
That's very cool.
It sounds too cute to be real, but that is the true story.
That's awesome. I mean, poetry, right? It's writing succinct text that creates meaning and value. Not unlike software, right?
Yeah. And the smaller it is, the better it is.
Huh.
When there's nothing else that you can take out, that's when it's sort of finished. And I like that same thing with software engineering.
Do you feel like the poet in you still gets to express itself in the profession you've taken on?
Very rarely. My creative outlet these days is the jokes that I managed to squeeze into our YouTube videos, I think. So when we did the thing with Rivers Cuomo last year, for example, I got to write that intro. So I was writing jokes for Rivers to say, and that's sort of, I have those occasional moments where I'll have a creative outlet like that. Maybe if we do it again, I can get him to read an epic poem or something about Flutter. I don't know.
Well, knowing you and getting an opportunity to see some of the work that you've done, the content you've created over the years, things like that you did with Rivers, it's actually really interesting background and insight to know that you come from that creative writing and that sort of poetry background. Because now that you mention it, I kind of see it in your persona and how you kind of communicate. And so, it's something to be said for that. And it seems like it has helped you in your career.
I'm by no means the world's greatest poet. I was far from even the best poet in my class in the program that I was in. And so it's not like going through the MFA program for 3 years was, setting me up for poetry superstardom. But I do think there's something useful in, my whole identity was about creativity and craft for 3 years, those 3 years. Like, what can I come up with that nobody else has come up with? How do I make something new out of the same words everybody else is using? And I think being focused on something like that for a significant length of time helps you sort of develop some new skills and a new way of thinking about what you're doing for your own work. And so that, even though I'm never going to go win the Walt Whitman Prize or a Pulitzer or something for my poetry, I definitely benefited from it. And if I am providing value to our community and to the world through the work that I'm doing now, the work I'm doing is probably better for those 3 years that I had.
I love it. That's super interesting. I mean, I think one of the things that's been really fun in my own career, given what we do, getting meeting a lot of different people in a lot of different industries, the sort of backgrounds that lead to what we do. Everything, in our space, we're building software, building applications, but there's so much creativity that goes into it. And so creativity is a skill in and of itself, and you can practice and learn that in many ways. It doesn't just mean like designing a file or writing, some beautiful, concise bit of code. It can come from creative writing and everything else.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure need it in your job. You have to lead and motivate and inspire not only the people in your company, also the people that you're talking to as potential clients, right? Like, this is the future that we can get to together and stuff like that. And I'm sure being able to convey that succinctly and correctly is important.
Yeah. Communication, conveying ideas. And in a way, like, software applications are communication and conveyance of an idea. You sit down with an idea, creativity. I actually want to rewind back to that statement you said, because as you were describing what you were doing in those 3 years, it sounded like you could have been describing a CTO at a startup, kind of bringing that creativity and thinking, how do I create something interesting no one's ever done before with words? Same kind of idea. And so you're in DevRel now, which actually seems like kind of the perfect intersection of these things, of being able to actually convey ideas to people effectively. Can you tell us, we know you started in creative writing and poetry, and then you got into Google. What's been your journey through Google to your current role?
Yeah. So when my wife got her job offer, we were living in Ohio. The first thing I said to her, after congratulating her, was like, I'm going to go work at Google. And I made that a life goal. Specifically, the thing I wanted to do was be one of the people on YouTube. I had seen the folks that were, I think it was Polymer at the time, that they were advocating for and teaching people how to use. And the idea that I might be able to do sort of scaled effect on the developer community, that was something that I wanted, and to be one of those people that was helping everybody was something I very much wanted. And so I applied as DevRel to Google. It took me 2 tries to get in the company. I was so nervous for my first interview, I washed out at the phone screen. I could not have told the guy my middle name if he'd asked. I was so nervous. But the second one, I did a little better, but I'd always wanted to. DevRel just seemed technical, but also it also just seemed fun, and it seemed like you would be able to see when you help somebody in a lot of ways. You would see somebody be like, yeah, that helped, thank you for that. And that was the sort of thing that I wanted more than anything, to know that I'd done something to help other folks. And so I started in ads DevRel a long time ago. This is like 2014. I was a wide-eyed noogler, and I was there, hired by a great manager, a guy named Andrew Brogdon, who immediately left for Uber, and now I think is at DoorDash. But he taught me the ropes. I had another good manager there, and at a certain point with ads, I think a lot of people they get to a point where they're either going to stay in ads forever, or they're like, I've kind of done this for a bit and I want to go do something else. And I got really, really lucky and saw an internal job posting for Flutter. And so this was winter of 2017. And they had they were looking for an engineer on the DevRel team. And so I went and talked to Matt Sullivan at the time, who you would remember.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Matt Sullivan.
Great manager, Matt. And schemed out a way to work on the AdMob plugin for Flutter as a way of testing it out, and also trying to play my way onto the team. And so as soon as I started coding with it, I was like, well, I don't want to code with anything else. I'm ruined for other forms of development. I just want to do Flutter now. And so I sort of stuck with that and joined the team as sort of the first and pure engineer on the DevRel team. And eventually Matt moved on to another role, and the management job opened up. This is right at the start of COVID opened. And so I ended up in the manager role. And so I stopped working for a living, as I like to say, and just started doing spreadsheets and emails and reports and stuff. And now the job is very different because I end up enjoying the DevRel work vicariously through others.
Mm.
You know, there are a lot of wonderful folks in the DevRel team, and I get to sort of watch what, and occasionally give them advice on how they can get more out of their work and stuff like that. And you know, go tell people how great they are, get them promoted.
So as the poet, Andrew, do you miss sort of doing that actual work? One of the things about being a manager, right? You do have to live vicariously through it, and I like that phrase, like scaled effect, and that idea of what you were kind of hitting on there for DevRel, like how you can, you know, have this scale and impact on there. I think the same thing applies to management, like your ability to magnify and amplify through your team, and make your team more productive than what you alone could do. But sometimes we want to get into the work. I mean, I struggle with this. I haven't written a line of code in a long time, and I miss it. You know. So where are you in that journey?
It's you bring up a good point. Like there's a positive and a negative to it. On the positive side, I love the access to information that being a team lead gets me, and the ability to be in certain conversations about where are Dart and Flutter going in general, or what is Google doing in general about this thing, and being able to know what's up and be able to earlier in a work stream be able to affect it, and to be able to slot people on my team into it in a way that's beneficial for them and whatever we're trying to do. And that part I'm really grateful for. What took me a long time to get used to is while you're doing that, you're slowly losing your knowledge of certain other things, right? Like there was a point where I felt like I'm a really good expert level Flutter developer. And now I've had to give up some of those skills. I haven't had as much time with hands on keyboard, you know, similar to you, right? Like building things that way. And so if you asked me to do certain things that are like very recent Dart language features or Flutter features, I'd have to stop and go read one of the docs that my team created to review it and then go in first. You know, it's, I was joking to somebody the other day, like now it used to be if you asked me how to do something in Flutter, with Flutter, I could give you an answer. And now if you ask me, I'm like, well, I know somebody you can talk to. Mm. And my job was to make sure there was somebody that you could talk to who's an expert in that thing. But I have to deal with the fact that I am no longer that person. Mm. And that's been a challenge.
Yeah. It definitely changes, but you need people like you to be rising up so that the next generation can be amplified and know how to be successful effectively. We've also here talked a little bit about DevRel in general, and I think people can maybe piece together a little bit about what the role is. Maybe kind of take a step back, and how would you define DevRel in terms of what you do and its impact on the world?
Sure. You know, I think every company and even teams within a company is, you know, as big as Google, they all have slightly different definitions of it, it seems like. I tend to think of myself as the engineer closest to the door. So like if you come in to talk to Flutter as a thing, you know, at least the Flutter team at Google, I'm the first person you would see. And I would be there to say, hey, thanks for stopping by. What can we do for you? And sort of figure out what it is, what problem you're trying to solve and how we can help with it. Hopefully as a metaphor, that's not too bad. But I think the only reason Flutter matters in the world is that people use it to build things for actual users, right? There's a joke that sometimes goes around the office that like the folks working on Flutter don't actually spend a ton of time building apps because they're not application engineers, they're SDK engineers, right? Mm-hmm. That's just the job that they have. And the thing that makes, like I said, makes Flutter matter is, you know, and causes it to be like, how many minutes a day are you spending with Flutter on a device as a user, right? The only reason that's not zero is that people outside the Flutter team have built things that matter. And so they can't do that unless we connect the people with the technology, right? And so there's outbound ways of doing that where we're making sure that we can explain the value proposition of Flutter and help you make a decision about whether you want to use it. And we can help you get started as quickly and easily as you can. We can do things to help make sure the community that you're joining, either explicitly or implicitly, when you start using Flutter, is a healthy one that you can be proud of being a part of, because there are certainly tech communities that people aren't proud of being a part of, and things like that. And then there's also internal work that we do. Every time that we go to an event like a FlutterCon, or a Flutter event like that, we would want to hold a listening session. We have notes that we take from conversations. We'll write down, we talked to somebody who had this problem or where they were happy about this change and things like that. All of those get funneled back into our engineering and product teams to make sure that that connection from the person who we're trying to help by making a tool like Flutter and the people making that tool are as in sync. So it's a lot of communication. Now that I'm sort of stopping and thinking about it, it's a lot of two-way communication, and a little bit of teaching and a whole lot of engineering thrown in at the same time.
Sounds like a lot of care too for the community,
Yeah.
making sure you do right by them and you listen to them and engage them. And kudos to you and the others on the Flutter team, both current and past. I think one of the most exciting and interesting features of Flutter has been the community and the general positivity of it. You mentioned that, some communities, it's maybe not as aspirational to be a part of it, or they're a little bit more confrontational or something like that. And for the most part, I think Flutter community has been very welcoming, friendly, and engaging. And that has to be by no small part, or from no small impact of you guys. So,
But
okay.
it's funny, like Philip and Emily, who are they're no longer on our DevRel team, but they were a few years ago. I remember they were working on a blog post to sort of define what made the Flutter community a little bit different and what were sort of the principles that we'd want to see. There was just a general, it's like 2018, 2019, where everybody in Flutter just sort of looked at each other and they're like, we're not going to screw this up, right? Like, we're going to spend time actively making sure it stays this way. Like, we all just kind of agree, and everybody agreed. And that's not just DevRel, like the engineering team, the product leaders, everybody knew that like the folks that had already started to gather around Flutter, they weren't a typical developer community. They were far more welcoming. They're far more creative and fun and all of those positive things. And it was pretty clear even at that time in Google that it would be a crime not to make sure that we kept that going.
Yeah, I love that. How has it changed over the years? DevRel as a profession and with the tools that you use and sort of the approaches and how you engage the community.
Yeah.
How has that changed, and how do you see it changing into the future?
I mean, it's changing a lot right now. That's a good question. I think there are some things that, a lot of things we do, we're still would have been the same. We'll do them slightly differently now, but they're the same things that we would have done 8 years ago. I started making YouTube. I wanted to make YouTube videos the day I got to Google. And I've mostly been making them this whole time. The facilities have gotten a little bit better, definitely. The first studio I worked in at Google, we'd occasionally have to stop in the middle of the take because someone would walk by in hard-soled shoes outside, because it was just a random meeting room that they put sound insulation in and a camera. And now there's like a dedicated studio and stuff like that. So there's more, some parts of it are more sophisticated than they used to be. But the basic, the core of it is still just getting out and talking with people, right? And those things have not changed. I think one of the interesting bits now is, DevRel, the entire team exists to help solve developer problems, right? We want to make developers happy and fast and to help them improve the quality of their software with Dart and Flutter specifically. And it is, in the last year, 2 years, it has become very clear that experience as a developer is going to be more and more defined by AI-powered tools, right? And so now we're thinking about things like, okay, if a certain percentage of the code is going to be generated by an agent and then, reviewed and modified by a human being, that's the near-term future, I think, speaking for myself, just to be clear. That's the experience that we need to make as good as we can possibly make it. And so, one of the things that we're thinking about now is how do we make these agents code better and not just humans code better, right? We have a bunch of developer resources for human beings to read and use to build their own skills. All of these models were trained on it because it's all out in the open. You can find it all on GitHub and on our website and stuff like that, and on YouTube and things like that. But, an example change that we're talking about right now is, should we be shipping a markdown version of our release notes? so that if you're somebody using an agent, hopefully Gemini, but whatever anybody would like to use, Claude or any of the others, that's not going to be trained on a new stable release of the SDK the day that release comes out. So for something like dot shorthands, which is a new, feature that's well on its way to coming out, where you won't have to put the class name for an enum. Let's put the enum name. You can just put dot and then the value for something like cross-axis alignment when you're building a column or a row in Flutter. You won't have to put cross-axis alignment colon cross-axis alignment dot start or something like that.
Yeah.
You just put dot start at the end of that. If your model hasn't been trained on that, it's going to have no idea that you don't have to do that anymore. So you're going to generate code. You're going to have a whole bunch of analysis errors where it's like, hey, you don't have to do this. You can fix it. Or we can get ahead of that by giving you a markdown file with every release. It's like, here's the 3 things your agent needs to know in a markdown format. Go paste this into your AI rules. And now we've done that work for you and made that experience better. And that is an entirely new challenge for us. We've never been in the position of needing to upskill AI agents before. But if we're really trying to help developers be happy and effective, that kind of stuff is going to start coming into our work more and more. So that's a challenge to figure out not only how to do that stuff, but like what are the things that would actually matter and will actually help.
It's fascinating. So much of the work that you guys have done before, and when you think about tools, how would developers learn things, and what were the communities where DevRel would maybe play? It's the YouTube videos you put out, the content, the blog posts, the talks you give at an event, questions answered on Stack Overflow. All this stuff has helped to train these AI models, but it's fascinating to think that in the future, developers will be agents and agent supported, right? So even regardless of where this all goes, and obviously it's a hot topic, let's assume that a developer for some class of app will just be AI. Now your target audience is no longer just human developers, but agentic developers. And so the content you want to deliver to them has a different format. It's going to, what's more efficient for them to ingest it effectively.
Yeah. I think it'll also be really interesting too when we get to a place like that and suddenly the bar for software experiences just starts going up. There's that interesting question of, okay, software as we know it, we can now automate more of it, right? And make it more cheap, make the same quality up to a certain point more cheaply and efficiently. Do we then keep that model for what we expect of software, or does that allow us to now have much better software and just the top end of the quality bar goes up? And now Flutter needs to make sure that we're supporting people all the way up there, right? With things like more, workflows that are more adaptive to users and things like that, more personalized stuff like that. Are we going to start, you might remember from like Flutter Interact, this would be the Wayback Machine, where like Grant Skinner had his vignettes and some of the demos that people were doing were like, these are radically new UIs that right at that moment, someone would have to sit down and really work on to get them right. Maybe somebody has time to do that, to really get those bits right, because all of the rest of it that's sort of the well understood part has been done with an agent, right? And so now people come to expect things that are that much more custom and interesting. Something that looks like a television program written just for you or something like that. And so it'd be interesting to see, like, if we need to have resources for like, this is how you make software that just wouldn't have existed 3 years ago or something like that.
Right. Yeah, there's a word I've been using recently about like abundance, right? Like these technologies create this opportunity for abundance, where you can just do more things and more interesting things. I think I saw you in the audience at FlutterCon when we had the panel with Lawrence and Michael from Universal, and they said 3 things about their adoption of Flutter that really stood out to me. One was the opportunity to invest more in animations that were these like delightful little things that Flutter's efficiency gave them time to invest in those types of user experience enhancements that maybe they wouldn't have otherwise. Doesn't really necessarily have a huge business case on paper, but it improves the user experience and creates the magic and the things they're looking for. The second thing was like the expansion to the kiosk work, where it's like that had incremental impact on the business, but to maintain a brand new software application and a different thing with another team, the extra cost of creating it and then maintaining it indefinitely, like the ongoing cost, maybe it wouldn't have happened. But because of Flutter's efficiencies and the portability of that code, they could kind of add that extra business value, right? And then the third was they had space now to maybe explore ways to get like agentic experiences into their app because Flutter creates this space. I just heard you also come to then talking about those same kind of ideas about, that I've been connecting with Flutter, and I think those of us in the Flutter community have been talking about for a long time, to AI,
Yeah.
which is like that efficiency. It allows us to do all this extra new stuff that otherwise we wouldn't have time or resources to do.
Yeah.
Super cool.
Yeah. I think it's been a constructive way to frame it. And I'm not the only one doing this where I work. There's a lot of people have anxiety about how AI is going to come in and change things as we go forward and stuff like that. And I think a useful way to frame it is, could we use this to make it possible for us to do all the things we wish we could have done over the past several years, all those things that we wish we had time to get to? How do we automate away the stuff that we're not excited by so we can work on that?
So when you think about the future of DevRel, I mean, in a way, on one level, there could be this little intermediate gap where all of a sudden your workload is doubled or increased a little bit at least, because you still need to do things for developers. It's not like you can abandon the human developers and not create content for them. But now you have to also kind of create like kind of maybe new types of data or MCP servers or different formats or things that kind of allow the agentic developers to get involved. What's the crossover of that look like? Does that go on forever? Because, one of the things people talk about is, you even said kind of in your descriptions, like, we'll probably be like sitting on top of this and observing. And at some point, I think for some unclear time horizon, I don't know if it's 1 year or 10 years, we'll still expect a human to be able to get in there and understand the code. So you still have to educate them. You still have to make the content available to them. How do you like plan that out over the next, it seems like like no one knows.
If I had an answer to if I had a roadmap for that, I'd be promoted immediately. But no, it does. It is. I think of Waymo, and like, when do you take the safety driver out of the car, right? When do you trust what it's doing enough that you don't really need to have a human being getting into it and checking out the underlying code? And at what scope can an agent do that? Like, if you have a top, very top app, you can't, again, speaking for myself here, you could not turn that over to an agent right now and just be like, yeah, boy, there's an agent out there that can go code, this top 100 app for iOS or Android, right? But there is a scope where you can do that, analogous to like the little geo-fenced area that these cars go in where they're like, okay, we're good if we stay in this box and that kind of a thing. And so I think I think there will always need to be people and these agents working together when you get to a certain point of quality and size. And so we're probably always going to, for the, my remaining career here, I anticipate there will need to be human beings that can get into the source and look at it. And if a large number of those folks. What I'm hoping is that some of the things that we do in order to make agents better will also make people better in the same way. And I'm going to give me some rope here. So I'm going to compare this to accessibility. I remember having a conversation with somebody once about the curb cuts that they have at corners now, which didn't really exist when I was a kid, like 40 something years ago. You'd go to a curb and it was just, you go to the corner, it was just a drop off. And now most of them in my neighborhood have the little ramps with the bumps, and those are put in as an accessibility measure to help folks who use a wheelchair to get around, they can get around more easily, right? But that also helped everybody with a baby in a stroller, which has been me over the last 10 years. Everybody that was carrying boxes on a dolly, something like that. It also helped all those people, even though that wasn't the official purpose of it, right? And so what I'm hoping is maybe by needing to take a step back and say, okay, now we're serving these two slightly different populations and trying to upskill them both. How are we going to change our resources, and in what ways do we help both audiences at once, right? And so we have been looking at ways to refactor some of our existing resources, and it's forcing us to sort of think about what were the original principles that went into this 6 years ago. For example, when we made the Flutter Cookbook, for example, which is a resource been around for a long time. What was it we were trying to do then? Do we still need to do this? What is, in this new world, what is the right way to do it? And if we plan that out and execute it correctly, we're going to help these audiences. That is what I'm doing anyway.
Yeah. how do you show people what's possible when like anything's possible? You know, how do you like
Yeah.
almost when you I wonder because the cookbook, right? I think part of that was to illustrate, hey, you can do these hard things, and here's some ideas maybe to get you started and to illustrate some code
Mhm.
patterns and things like that. To some extent, I wonder if when you get to a point where I can just sit down and type something, um, how do I know what to look for anymore? You know, it's sort of like I remember not so much anymore, but when I lived in the city and you'd open Grubhub or DoorDash or something like that, and you go to order, and you just have this like abundance of choice. There's like a million restaurants you could order from. There's like 37 Indian restaurants you can order from, and you're like, how do I know which one's good? They're probably all good. And almost sometimes my wife and I would just be like, let's just like forget it. We're just gonna cook the chicken that's in the fridge. We can't even pick. You know what I mean? Um, and so it's interesting to think about like when you get to this world where there's everything is possible, how do you then create inspiration for people? Right. Um, how do you give them a vision of like what they can do if like they
Mhm.
already have the tools at their fingertips, and making sure that those of us in a position to create that inspiration take that job with respect and honesty and the sort of importance that it is, because if we stop showing people what's possible because we just assume that they can just do it because everything is possible, that could maybe, come back around to stifle innovation, so
Yeah.
it's kind of interesting to think about. DevRel is like just such an interesting spot in this whole thing because you guys are like educating developers. There's like this new era of developers coming in. Everything's changing. When you think about so much of the anxiety and so much of the change, part of it's like on the developer workflow. How do we make things? You're like doing that, but also kind of around a framework that has become really popular. A lot of people are using it. How is, how is it changing like how Flutter is being kind of thought of, and how you kind of think about this going forward in a world where maybe developers aren't directly writing the code as much? What is that impact on Flutter's future vision, and where do you see Flutter heading? Or I guess another way to think about it would be, what's something that excites you the most about where this is all going?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a lot of little, I mean, there's some big things and there's some little things in there. I remember having a conversation several years ago with the UX lead for Flutter, a guy named Tao. He was very, very smart. And this is like 2.5, 3 years ago, where he was talking about if a lot of code is going to start being generated by agents, it's not actually going to be typed into a keyboard. Does that make readability more important than code terseness? Like in the way that Dart's going to evolve as a language,
Mm.
because or do you care as much about how many characters are in use if you don't have to physically type them? And it makes it faster and easier for you to read the code and understand it quickly, because we're going to be doing less typing and more reviewing and reading. And he was that far ahead because he's a really smart guy. But I think there's going to be a lot of little details like that that will start popping up in some of the planning, and already have to a certain extent, right? And so that opened my eyes at that moment of how, like, oh, things are really going to fundamentally change as we go through the next however many years. Um, and I think one of the things that will I think Flutter's core value proposition is still going to matter. I think Flutter's, the ability to have a consistent experience across platforms from one code base, that's going to matter whether it's an agent that creates it or a human being that creates it, right? Like you can go right now to one of the code generation sites, and there are a lot of great ones. I use Firebase Studio all the time. That is still a stochastic thing, and if you give it a prompt, even creating the same prompt twice with the Agentic prototyper, you'll get two slightly different results. And so if you go and ask, in the same platform, same tool, you'll get two different results. And so if we're looking at a future where people want to be able to have a vision, express that intent to the machine, and then have that come to life across devices, the core value prop of Flutter is still going to play into that, because you're going to have inconsistencies. You'll have a bug over here that doesn't exist over here. And by the way, the underlying code that you were trying not to pay attention to is different, and all that kind of thing. So I think there are core things that will absolutely stay the same, but they'll hopefully what will happen is we'll start seeing Flutter reaching new types of places and things like that. Um, People have talked about how application models themselves might end up changing. But you see every day, it seems like the folks working on AI, they have a new way to make like mini apps and stuff like that. You know, that's a whole new sort of ecosystem potentially. And I have no idea how that's going to inform Flutter and vice versa, but that's probably a thing that will happen as we move forward. And so the sort of reach that you can have as an application developer will change. And so that I think will be really interesting.
Yeah. What's fascinating for me personally about AI is how similar to human interactions and thinking and kind of like it's very similar. And even when you think about teams of agents doing things. So I mean, I'm biased, of course, but I totally agree with you that I think it doesn't make sense for AI to write the same app multiple times either for different platforms. And I think to some extent, I think it actually illustrates the value of Flutter in a way that now I think people can understand because we have new kind of ways to think about. People understand now that if you ask an AI to do something, it's going to do it differently each time, that it's going to have hallucinations. There's all these things I have to check and make sure it's okay. And when you think about it, that's not really any different than if I go to an iOS and an Android team and I say, hey, I need a screen that does this thing. And if I give them no more information, they're going to go off and they're going to do their thing. They're going to do their product work. They're going to do their designs. They're going to make this app. And the thing I'm going to get back is not going to be the same thing in both places. So like agents are doing the same exact thing, you know, as human teams would do in terms of permutations and variations. And so I tend to agree with you that I think actually, you know, AI plus Flutter, I think is a massive win. And I think at some point the world will, I mean, I think us in the Flutter community, we have a bit of a head start here. But I think people will understand the value of like, okay, there's hallucinations. There are non-deterministic things that are going to happen here. And I need to like reduce my surface area and increase my ability to review what this thing has produced. And if we could get that, and to some extent, I'd never thought about that, what you're saying about Dart before. It's interesting to think about how do you like do program languages evolve to become really, really useful for humans to review the output, not to write it in the first place. That's a fascinating thing to think about. That's really what it should be optimized for in the future world. Now, you know, now that you said it, it makes obvious sense. It's like AI is going to write it. I need to review it. It should be optimized for me to review it.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
Yeah. And the whole thing, building on that, the whole thing about, you know, specification driven development that's starting to become a new buzzword, you know, spec driven software, that's going to be interesting, I think, too, because now you have the source code that is being generated by a model for you to review the actual code that's going to become the executable. But you also have sort of an agreed upon format for this spec that defines what the application is supposed to do and the sort of intent behind it and stuff like that, that then you and an agent collaborate on so that another agent can then go and turn that into code and stuff like that. I remember another smart person I used to work with, Adam Barth, one of the original engineers on Flutter, talking about Flutter a long time ago. It was like, how quickly can you express your intent to the machine about what you want it to do? And I think now we're gonna end up in a world where we have two different ways we kind of do that. We have a natural language way of doing it, and then we have the code that is the step where we have to say, you know, but actually I meant this other thing, so let's tweak this over here. And you'll have a code representation and a natural language representation, and both of those sort of combine to define the behavior of the application. But there again, being able to review one set of code to go with your spec is better than 3 sets or 6 sets, right?
Totally agree. And I think actually the Flutter mindset in terms of what it's done, it's very aligned. So anytime I talk to somebody and they're like skeptical or worried about AI and where this is going, I think it's helpful sometimes to root in like, I think AI in terms of tooling that helps an engineer be more productive is actually the same exact thing as Flutter. You know, it's like, it's helping us to be more productive and express our vision and our intent way faster and more productive. Whereas before it was like, okay, how do I reach my users? Well, some of them are on iOS, some of them are on Android. I have to do that. And so the old way was to do things twice. But now if I can consolidate into one place, it's far easier, more efficient for me to get that to the people I need to have it. But if AI is another toolkit on top of that, that makes it even faster and easier for me to express my ideas and get them to my end users, ultimately it's solving the same benefit that any framework, you know, that makes developers more productive is solving. Yeah, it's super interesting. Yeah, a lot of interesting. I know you're also interested in agentic apps in general.
Yeah.
And so I know just personally you're interested in those things. Can you let's talk about that. Like, what are agentic apps actually, and sort of like AI and agentic behaviors in app experiences? Where does that go? What does that look like?
Yeah. Yeah, sure. It's another thing. I think if you talk to 10 different people, you get 10 slightly different, 10 slightly different definitions or explanations. So that I can give you mine. You know, an agent, the best definition I've heard, is an agent is a reasoning capability, usually an LLM these days, combined with tools and a goal. So you take an LLM like Gemini, you give it tools to access the outside world and have side effects, basically, and then you give it a goal for a thing you want to accomplish, and you package that up, and that's an agent. And then an agentic app would be an application that uses an agent like that for some or all of its functionality. Um, and I think we're at different stages right now of what people have actually begun putting into production for what those can look like. And I think that this is a thing that I'm particularly excited about because I think it's going to be fun, and I'm sort of a fun-driven developer. Um, the there right now, a lot of agentic experiences are a wall of text where you're talking almost directly with an LLM, and maybe it might have a function call or two for things that it can do, but you're conversing in natural language by typing things like into a phone or stuff like that. And you you know there's times when you would still need to do things like that and use text to talk with an agent. But I think in the future we're going to see things where someone has defined an experience in such a way that the AI can sort of express itself and ask questions using more UI than just text, right? And a text view. Um, and so, we had a demo that we Google Cloud Next this year that was a plant debugger, was the internal name for it, where it was you could describe what's going on with a plant that was troubled. You could take a picture of it, and then it would guide you through what kind of looked like a wizard workflow that was being sort of come up with on the fly based on what you were saying and what you were telling it. And so rather than forcing you to just have an ongoing conversation like you were chatting with tech support or something like that, it was displaying buttons. The LLM was given the ability to say, oh, I need to ask the user to pick one of three things. The application knows how to ask the user to pick one. So the LLM would tell the app would throw up some widgets that had buttons, and off it would go. And I think we're going to have more experiences maybe where an agent is sort of tracking progress on a workflow and deciding what needs to be done and how to work with the user in order to accomplish that goal. Like you can imagine, I was looking at cars today, and I went on a car manufacturer website and was just pricing out if I wanted to buy a new sedan. You can imagine something like that where rather than having a strictly defined workflow, it would guide you through something where it knows what questions to ask at the right times and stuff like that, and can on the fly present UI because it knows what tool the LLM has a chain of thought going. It knows how to ask the user things because it's been given tools to do so, and it knows how to define success and whether it's close or far away. So I think you'll have more things like that in the future where the state of the app is both some local state and also the state of what an agent either running on device or in the cloud has stored within its current chain of thought.
Interesting. So app state.
Hopefully that was an answer to your question. That was a bit of a ramble. I don't know.
No, I like it. I like it. It's interesting to think about like app state as context to like the user experience that you're creating, right? Like there's a bunch of things that I've done and things I've done in the past, and maybe something where I'm at right now, and like feeding all of that to something that can actually influence the user experience in like as you're using it is pretty exciting. I was at a tech event recently, and a prominent member of the community named Larry, he had this interesting insight around, as engineers, what do we want to do? We want to give every user like the optimal experience, and we have all these tools that have been invented, and even like A/B testing tools and things we can do, and we're trying to figure out what's the best experience. But all of those tools, because the way we write software is deterministic, and we write things and if else statements, and we got to ship it. Generally speaking, you're optimizing for like what is interesting to the most people, right? So I'm going to test like this color button or that color button, and I'm going to pick the one that the most people like. But what that means is by definition, generally speaking, there's still people that like the other color, but we just opted
Yeah.
to go with the one that the most people liked. And imagine you get to
Mm-hmm.
a point where these like on-device agentic UI stuff can like really be hitting every single person with exactly what they want from a personalization perspective, and giving developers the ability to actually create experiences that really are one to infinity, right? Like, I'll put this thing out there with intent and
Mm-hmm.
some tools that will help to like meet your exact needs. I think that's super inspiring and cool.
Yeah, and it's if you'll pardon me a callback, it's that idea again of like, does the quality bar go up, right? It used to be that we could just go for some local maximum in terms of would most of our users pleasing the most of our users as we could. Can we get to the point where everybody has that same experience as you're describing? And then some of the new problems that are cropping up, like, can you measure? How do you measure whether it's better or not? Right? Effectively, because there's a lot of pressure right now to just slap AI onto whatever you're doing, but that's going to fade away, right? That over time, and it'll be like, okay, is this measurably better for our users and therefore for us? Are they able to do what they want to do more efficiently, so they're happier? That makes me, our business is stronger as a result and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Or did we just put AI on it for the sake of putting AI on it? And
Yeah.
where are the guardrails, right? If I'm putting an LLM in charge of an experience, because the first I'll be honest. I have a bunch of apps. These chatbots keep popping up in them, and the first thing I do is like, how can I break this? What can I do to get out of just to see if I can do it? And that's an important. How do you secure it? How do you keep it in not only in terms of typical information security, but also in terms of like your brand security? How do you make sure that you don't end up on Hacker News for doing your agent driven experience just did something horrible? And so those are still problems being worked on right now.
Yeah.
I think are really interesting.
Well, and this is where we have this dichotomy of like things are moving so fast, but there's so much change. Because I totally agree with you. Like, all the tools we have for testing, analytics, like A/B testing, app performance, all of these things are based on a deterministic paradigm. So when you think about, okay, I'm gonna build this app and I'm gonna set up my analytics events and I'm gonna track shopping cart conversion flow, right? And that's just based on a sequence of events triggering. But if all of a
Mhm.
sudden I'm handing off large parts of my experience to this agent that is non-deterministic, no longer can I rely on these deterministic based tools to evaluate whether the thing was successful. It's almost like I'd have to like hand this thing out to the world, and then at the end of the user state, almost ask like another LLM, here were your business goals and customer experience goals.
Yeah.
Based on the state you've observed, was the goal achieved? Because like
Yeah.
otherwise, I don't know how you could have like a more legit logic based tool, have those kind of outcomes. So it's fascinating because all parts of the stack, everything about DevOps and testing and customer engagement and analytics, like all that stuff has to be updated for things that are non-deterministic now.
Yeah.
It's pretty
And
fascinating.
it can be unsettling, but it's also exciting, right?
100%. So I want to ask one more question just about generally your experience. And one of the things here on what we try to do here is also understand a little bit like what helps teams to be successful. And so I wanted to kind of take some of your experience coming up through all the way from being a poet, which we learned about today, all the way through to, being DevRel, getting into management positions, observing the Flutter team grow and the leadership changes and things, and then where we go forward. As you think about going forward, what are some like leadership principles that you've observed or that you believe in that help teams be successful with technology?
You ask, it's going to be different for different teams. And so I'm just immediately thinking of mine and what I've actually seen. I think empathy is never going to not be important. That is something that I could definitely say. There are lots of parts of being a manager I'm not that great at. I am a creative scatterbrain. And so I tend to, the team that I lead sometimes reflects that in certain ways. But really knowing the folks on your team and in your community and genuinely caring about knowing them goes a long way to you making smart decisions. And I remember chatting with somebody once and about how one of the things that I've learned now that I've been in various ways in and out of software engineering that I would go back and tell myself when I was 18, if I could, is that like your ability to work with, inspire, and listen to people will be more impactful on your career trajectory than the technical skills that you're so carefully trying to develop right now. That is something that I definitely had to learn. And that's not saying you could be a slouch on the tech. Like, you have to understand the ground truth of the industry that you're in. But like, if you know the folks that you work with, and especially your reports, well enough to know where they're trying to go with their lives and the way they tend to conceptualize and think about their own work, you're going to be in a better position to help them by lining them up with the right opportunities. And you'll be able to anticipate what they might need from you a lot better than if you just don't take the time to do that. And so I think of the managers that I've had, the best ones always had a really good beat on that. And that's definitely something that not only has helped me in my career because they're giving me good advice, but made it very easy to trust that they understand me and that they're looking out for me. So maybe if that's an answer to your question, that's probably the first thing that springs to mind.
Yeah, I love it. I think that's great. Empathy is increasingly hard to find in the world too, unfortunately. And I think you're right. I think we might need it more than ever with machines taking over, because at least us humans, we got to get along and got to, help each other out along the way. So I think that's well said. I think that's maybe a good place to stop. So thanks, Andrew. That was awesome. So many tremendous insights. And I think the DevRel side of this change of AI is something you don't hear about as much because everyone's focused on the models and the pace of change of how it changes the developer experience. But I think you guys are right in the wheelhouse of the relationship between the people making things with this technology and the technology itself. And so I really appreciate your insights today and the time spent.
Hey, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. It's great to talk to your audience as well. And it's always nice to chat with you. So
Likewise.